Hello everybody, it is time to look at user interface and main menus today. So what we're going to be looking at basically revolves around using the scene manager to transition between scenes. In this case, we're going to be looking at main menus, win scenes and lose scenes. That they're all basically the same, it's just a screen with stuff on and you can put whatever stuff you like on that. So we're going to have some scene management and user interface. That's what UI stands for. We're going to be creating an empty project, setting up a scene to be in 2D mode for editing it in kind of user interface space. Creating a canvas, which is the core of any 2D space. Creating a series of scenes. Displaying a value on screen. Customizing fonts, because it may not be obvious how you do that. And then hopefully, if we get time, using some more complex tools. Let's get straight into it. Unity has had an update, so if you notice when you go to Unity Hub either at home or at college, you may now get a red icon next to the installs because there has been a security alert detection. This is nothing we need to be concerned about, but they take security very seriously. This is if you were publishing it for industry, they've discovered a bug that could potentially be exploited, so there's a way that can be managed, but we'll deal with that. We don't need to take any action basically. So within our projects, we are going to create a new project, just like we did last week. We're going to be using Unity 6.2.2, and we're going to be using one of the core templates, just like we did before, and we're going to be using the Universal 3D, just like we've done before. Even though we're doing everything today about main menus, which are 2D, we still care about Universal 3D because your game is probably going to be in 3D space. So let's create that. We're going to give it an appropriate name. Today's going to be menus, menus, and we're going to put it of course in our source and repos folder, which make sure you select that after opening Visual Studio 2022 and signing in. Create project and fades to black. Okay, so we've created our Unity project. We are going to say that first task is done, and now we're going to be setting the scene to work in 2D mode. Now if this is going to be your main menu, we've got to think about the position of the camera, we're going to think about the way that it works, but you can also have this as an overlay on top of any regular scene if it's displaying things like health information or hearts or lives or score or something along those lines. So to do this, what we can do is click on this 2D button over here, which will take us into 2D mode. Now when you're in 2D mode, rather unsurprisingly, it snaps to one side. You know you're in 2D mode because you lose the little gizmo, which appears over here showing you what perspective you're in because you're just looking from behind square front. What this scene is going to represent for us at the minute is going to be our main menu, and we're going to create 3 different scenes. So as a reminder, when you create a scene by default, you get the name of your project in the top left hand corner. We call this project menus, and the name of the currently open scene follows that. So this is the sample scene that is open. You can go into the scenes subfolder and that will show you the currently open, well, a scene, which is the only one that we've got, sample scene. It's really important that we rename these things, especially when you start pulling in assets from the asset store. Because if they have a scene with the same name, it will override the one you've got. And because sample scene is the default and some packages and assets still have that default name, it's important one of the first things that you do is start renaming your scenes. So in the scenes folder, give sample scene a right click, give it a rename, and this is going to be our main menu. Let me just spell that. Capital M for both with a space in between. Now, when you name something, with variables, we have to be very, very careful. We also need to be careful here. But this is going to be a string of text that we're going to reference later. So as long as we know what our spelling is for our main menu, I've chosen to do a capital M for both main and menu with a space in between. One thing that students often do by mistake is put a space on the end, which is not what we want to do. So make sure just at the end of the U, you don't have space, press enter, and you can now see that the main menu is what's open in this currently open scene. So once you've renamed sample scene to main menu, go into 2D mode. We are now going to go to game object, UI, and we're going to create some buttons for our main menu. So I'm going to create a button that makes use of TextMesh Pro, if you can do the same. We need to import TextMesh Pro Essentials, which is that button there. It'll take a second for it to do. And then you can close that importer down. This would look really, really weird, but if you zoom out and 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 keep zooming out, eventually you will find your canvas and the button we've just created. So whether in 2D mode or not, we'll see that there's now a big rectangle within our world. Now, from the perspective of our game, this will appear in the bottom left-hand corner of our view, because what happens is this big rectangle will be drawn over the top of your scene. No matter what your screen is, it will always be drawn over the top. So if I take this button, which is a child of the canvas that we've just created, you can position that wherever you like. And why 2D mode is useful is it suddenly turns the canvas a little bit like text boxes in Word. They try and snap to certain positions, so you can resize using the rect transform tool, which is here. So you can resize using the blue selection tools, snap it to where you may want your button to be. But if I were to be out of 2D mode, this would not be an option. It doesn't have the snapping tools in quite the same way. So whenever you're editing UI, make sure you're in 2D mode. Okay, now what we want to do with this button is I'm going to position it down here, and I'm going to click on the button's little arrow next to it to open up its children, and you can see that the canvas contains a button which within itself contains some text. So the text is obviously the word button here, which we can change by changing the text over here. So I'm going to have this say start game instead. You can change the font size by doing that. You'll also notice there's an option to change the font asset, but if you do, there's not a huge amount of fonts to choose from. Later in the tutorial, I'll show you how you can change your font, because you basically never want it to be the default one. You can obviously change the font, obviously style. If you want to change the orientation, you've got options down here as well. What I don't recommend changing is at the bottom, you've got the shader. And it's very tempting to change these properties for like the color and outlines and other things, but that will affect every text within your game. So if you're just trying to change the color of a button, this is not necessarily the way to do it. So we can show you how to do that a little bit later on if you'd like. So I'm going to set the font size here to, let's say, a nice round 32. And there we go. Notice that when you use the rect transform, you've got the choice of the blue control corners, but you've also got the choice of these yellow ones. And basically, you never want to touch the yellow ones. So Control Z if you have. You basically, that's your margins. We don't want to edit the margins. We want to edit the object itself. Notice I'm resizing the text box at the minute. Control Z to undo that. Whereas 9 times out of 10, I want to edit the button, which will also affect the text, which is a child of it. Obviously, be mindful to make sure the text doesn't go in a position where it's going to go outside the text box. That would look dumb. So we've got our start game, and if we look through the eyes of the camera, we'll see that that's in a position and it's okay. But we've got our default skybox in the background, and that doesn't look very good at all. So back in our scene, we're going to right click on the canvas, create a new UI element, which is going to be a panel. So I've now created a panel. You can name it, but panel is fine. And you can change the color of the panel to be whatever you like. I would like my background to be completely dark, maybe a quite dark grey. So I'm going to choose a color that I would like, a dark grey. And I'm going to change the alpha transparency, so alpha is obviously transparency value, to be not to 0. I want it to be all the way up to 255. Obviously now my text, my button has disappeared. And there's a really easy fix for this. Anything you want to appear on top of something has to be a child of that something. So if I grab the button here and make it a child of the panel by dragging and dropping it, I don't want to drop it where it's a blue line. I want to drop it where it's a grayed out section over panel. That will now make it a child of the panel. Everything reorders, and you can now see canvas has a child, which is panel, which has button, which has text as a child. And you can reposition your button if you want to. Now, if I go back to game, you can see that will completely fill the screen, though there may be a tiny bit of bleed around the edges where you can still see the skybox coming through. What we are also interested in doing, though, when you set up your main menus, is you don't want the game to display in what's called free aspect. We want to force this to be whatever your screen's resolution is always going to be. Now you can force this to be 4K or 1080p, but what is always best to select is 16:9 aspect, because that's the aspect ratio of most monitors, and that's the aspect ratio of the monitors we use at college. So choose from free aspect, choose 16:9, and that will automatically make it fit to whatever a screen resolution is. So if I change this box, it will always be the width of a monitor and the same aspect ratio. So if I go back to scene, you'll now see that the canvas will have resized. Okay, I'm just going to show you the canvas options at the minute because we shouldn't really need to affect them. But on the canvas settings, you can see you've got screen space overlay, which is the default mode that we want, and some other settings as well. Generally, you don't need to fiddle with the canvas. But anything that's going to appear on your main menu or any button or items that you've got must be a child of that canvas. So if I were to create a new game object, a new UI element, and let's say I want a new button, let's do a button using TextMesh Pro, that will appear as long as it is a child of the canvas, which it has made by default. If you ever make that so it's not a child of the canvas, it will completely disappear because the canvas does the drawing. Okay, just making again sure that that's a child of the panel. And you can do what you like. So maybe we wanted a button for start game, and maybe we also wanted a button for exit. Let's do that. So I'm going to create one for start game, and this is going to have its text to say exit game. I'm going to change its font to 32 so it matches the other one, and I want it to be bold. There you go, start game, exit game. And what I also want is a child of the panel, so I'm right clicking on panel to do this, and I'm going to UI and I'm going to choose some text. I'm going to position this text box to be big and bold at the top, and this could be the title for our game. Come up with a better name than that. So I'm going to bold that. Let's do that. Oh, that's center aligned. Cool. Now, if I want to change the color of this, I'm going to edit the vertex color, which is this option here, not this face color down here. I want to change the vertex color. So I can change that by perhaps making it a different color or whatever it is that you like. Make it an obnoxious color. Have some fun. Okay. So we're currently at the position where we've setting the scene as a 2D mode. We've created our canvas and we've created our main menu. In a minute, we're going to make our windscreen, our loose screen, and maybe our main game as well, just to transition between those scenes. Okay. I'm going to show you what this looks like in game and sort out any issues that you may encounter as well. So I've still got this slight bit of bleed around the edge where I can still see like the skybox poking around it. I don't really like that. So to resolve that, I'm going to go to the main camera. I think it lives under. Window, rendering, lighting. Environment. Default skybox, I'm going to set that to none. And I should have the option to change the color to black. Ambient color, black. So it's just all I did there was change the skybox material. Does that look better now? We'll look at that. But basically you can change it to the environment settings. You may be able to figure it out more than I can, but you get the idea. We can change the background if we wanted to. So what we're interested in now is having these buttons do something. It's important to note that it doesn't matter where your camera is. So my camera is currently down here, staring into the abyss. But your canvas will always be overlaid on top of what your camera can see. So it doesn't matter where it is in world space, it will always be drawn over the top. What we want is a script that when I press start game will take us somewhere. When I press exit game will bomb out or do something else. So what we're interested in doing here is making a new scene for us to go to. So in the scenes folder, remember that's under assets, scenes, and this space here. I'm going to right click and create a new scene. So just choose scene from the options, and we're going to call this game. What we're now interested in doing is making sure the build settings knows about these two scenes, because this is what we're going to call in a minute when we ask the scene manager to transition between these two scenes. So I'd like you to go to File and Build Profiles. And what you can see in the build profiles is the current list of scenes that it knows about. And it knows about main menu because that was created at the start, but it doesn't know yet about game. So you can drag game into that slot, or you can press open scene list and add the open scene. Okay, they've changed the way this works a little bit. You can just click open scene list and drag game into that. We'll need to do this for a couple of other things as well, but once you've got main menu and game, we care about that. What's important to note here is what this 0 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, if you've got lots of scenes in here, represent. This is when we make this into a full game, which scene will load first. Now, we want our main menu to be the top of that list. You always want the player to be greeted with the main menu first. You don't want to go straight into the game if you've got a main menu. That doesn't make sense. Maybe you're going to have credits, maybe you're going to have something else as well. But main menu should always be the top of the list, and you can disable those things from loading just by clicking the tick box, but that should never be necessary. So close that down. What we now want to do is to create a script that's going to manage all of these things. So right click anywhere in the asset space, we're going to create a new C# script. Have they moved it? Scripting. Mono behavior script is what we want. They've changed the way this works. So let's call this scene transition. I may have misspelled that. Spell it properly. So once that new scene transition script has been created, give it a double click to open it up. Unlike how I've taught you before, where we attach a script to a game object when we make it, we're just going to create the script and then attach it to a game object. And it'll be clear why in a minute. In order to do what we want to do, we need to tell this script that it wants to use the scene manager. So on line 2, we need to tell it to be using Unity Engine .scene management. And then at the end of the line, semicolon to say that you're done. I don't want anything from this line 6, in my case, to line 16. We don't want the start loop, we don't want the update loop. So let's delete all that. What we would like to make in here is a bunch of publicly accessible functions / methods, blocks of code basically that we can access and our buttons can access. So I would like a public, means it's accessible by anything, void, doesn't return any data when it does its thing, it just goes and does something, so it returns nothing, it returns void, followed by the name. Now I'm going to call this load main game, all one word, no spaces. Open and close regular brackets, open and close squiggly brackets. And then if I just go inside the squiggly brackets and press enter, it gives me a bit of working space. You should end up with a squiggly bracket there-ish and a squiggly bracket there-ish. Now we need to say what happens when we call this function. Well, I want to go oi scene manager dot load a scene please, and then in regular brackets the name of the scene we want to load, written exactly as it is written in our games. And because this is a string, it goes in double quotes. Now I'm pretty certain I called this main game, but I'm going to check. I called it game. Okay, capital G for game. So I'm going to load game, and then at the end of the line, semicolon to say that you're done. What I'm also going to do while I'm here is create another function underneath. So at the end of that, I would like a public void, looks exactly the same, exit game. Open and close regular brackets, open and close squiggly brackets. This isn't going to call the scene manager and tell it to leave the game. This is going to tell the program close the application, which is an application.quit instruction. Looks a bit like that. We won't see that work until we make a build of our game, but we'll do that in a little bit. So load main game and then exit game, and we will make others as we go. Things like load win and load lose. You'll probably figure out what that code's going to look like. So back into our game, making sure that we've got no compiler errors. And what we're going to do here is take that script that we have just written, drag and drop it onto the canvas. So if I drop that onto the canvas, you'll now see that scene transition lives there. This is the bit that's complicated though, and not obvious in my opinion. We now need to tell the buttons what to do when they are pressed. So with this button selected, which is start game, I'm going to scroll down to its button component where you can change its settings for its color and its icon and whatever. And I need to know what happens when it is clicked. So on clicked, I want to press this add icon to say I want you to do something. And the first thing it asks for is which object is containing the script we want to access. Now I slapped that script on the canvas so I know it's in one place and I can easily find it. So I'm going to drag the canvas into there. You can also select the circle and choose the canvas from the list. And then it will let you choose one of the functions that exists within there. And that lives under the scene transition script. And you can see we created our two functions here, load main game and exit game. So I'm going to choose load main game for that button. And then I'm going to select the exit game button and I'm going to do exactly the same here. Add a new event, drag the canvas into it. Scene transition is what I want and I want to exit the game. Now, if I press play, let's see what happens. So I click around, nothing. I press and hold start game. It knows I've clicked it. I let go and my game loads. And I know that it's loaded correctly because I can now see I'm in the game scene. There's just nothing in that scene. So let's go out of play mode, take us back to this scene. Going back into play mode again. And this time I want to press exit game and nothing will happen. I don't get any errors. But exit game, the application.quit instruction is designed to do something with the application, which we haven't created a build yet. So we'll do that at the end just to show you what that looks like. Okay, so our next bit is we're just going to go and make 2 more scenes, which are going to be our win and our lose scene, and you can do whatever you like within those scenes. So we can create a new scene just as we did before, and I'm going to call this win, and I'm going to create a new one. I'm going to have exactly the same thing in it. It's got to call it lose. Now you can do whatever you like within those scenes. You've got my permission to go in and create some interesting UI scenes for what a win scene and a lose scene may look like for a particular game. But if I go through where we wanted to kind of go through today, what I'm now interested in is how you could display the value on screen using some UI tools. So once you've got things like your win screen, your lose screen, you've customized it, I'm going to go into our game and I'm going to go out of 2D mode to imagine what we're working on here. Now, when you jump between scenes, it's important to remember that your camera will always stay in the same place, even though you jump between different scenes. So if you lose where you are, you can always double click on one of the objects and it will take you back into that part of the world. Now, I'm just going to quickly assume we're going to build a simple flat plane in our world. And I'm going to put that in position 0, 0, 0. I'll put that on 0, 0, 0. I'm going to scale it up to be quite a bit bigger. And I'm just going to put a simple 3D object in our game. Let's put a cube in there. Again at 0, 0, 0. Now, all I'm really interested in doing for now is if I look through the game window, it's not a very exciting game. But let's imagine we wanted a timer to appear up here as a countdown timer. And when that countdown timer reaches 0, it'll take us to our lose screen. So what we're going to create here is a quick script that's going to have a timer in it. Now, very similar, if you got all the way through my first tutorial, you'll have done this already. But we are going to create a new script. So I'm going to do game object create empty. We're going to call this timer. I'm going to add a new component to our timer, which I'm going to call timer again, which is a new script. I'm going to save that just in the assets folder. And if we double click to open up our timer script, this is going to be quite straightforward. However, we want it to be using TextMesh Pro, which is TM Pro in our top. And we don't need our start function. But what we do want is a publicly visible floating point value, which I'm going to call the time. Depends on how you want your game to be. Maybe you want the time to start as a big number and it counts down, or maybe it starts at 0 and it counts up. I'm going to assume we're going to start at 10 seconds and count down. So we're going to set the time to 600, semicolon, to say that you're done. Remember, because this is a float, it's good practice to finish that number with an F, because if you ever needed a decimal number, it will actually force you to put the F in. So just make sure you have that F at the end. Every frame, we are going to take the time, and it's going to decrease by 1 second per second. So the time is going to minus equal time dot delta time, semicolon, to say that you're done. That will work, but we actually want to display it on screen as well. So as well as creating the time, we now want a public text mesh pro UGUI, which is a ridiculously long name. Text mesh pro UGUI, that's the type of data, which I'm going to call text output, semicolon, to say that you're done. Now, every time the frame is redrawn and we're taking a second off of our time, we would also like the text output to equal whatever, or text output dot text, I should say, to equal whatever the time is, and convert that to a string. Ew, that didn't help at all. Should look a little bit like that. Okay, a couple of lines of code in there, some of which will be familiar to what you've done already. Now, the game will fail if I wanted to try and play this now. The time should decrease, but it should throw me an error saying it doesn't know what the text output is. And that's the error that we get here. Object reference not set to an instance of an object, because it doesn't know what the text output is, but the time is decreasing. I did set that to 10 minutes, didn't I? Oh, okay, cool. So what we're interested in doing now is creating a new piece of UI again. So UI, we're going to create a text using Text Mesh Pro, which will also create a canvas and an event system. If you didn't notice, that was created previously as well. We're going to go back in the game, 2D mode, and you will find that the text is probably created in a really random place. Zoom, 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 zoom. Has to put it in the middle. Oh, it is that. It's just incredibly difficult to see because, you know, white on a bright background is difficult to see. So I'm going to select this text and I'm going to change its vertex color to perhaps be a more visible dark color. Let's go black. Black legible. I don't care what it says to start off with. Don't care what it says. But what I do care about, some nonsense in there, is that every frame it's going to get replaced with what the time is. So I'm in 2D mode. I'm going to stick that up the corner. Up the corner, you'll do there. You can also set it to certain corners by default without having to fiddle around with the 2D edit. So back into Rect tool if that's not working for you. You can just snap it using the Rect tool, or you can click on this icon here where it's got center and middle, and you can press the Alt button on your keyboard. That's the ALT button, Alt. Don't know why you've got to press Alt, but the icons all change, and then you can left click on top left, top center, top right, etc, 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 etc. And while holding this, you can make it fit the entire width and some settings as well. But I'm just going to choose top left. So now what we can do is tell our timer, which is expecting a piece of Text Mesh Pro, to drag that text into there, and hopefully now it should override the word test and replace it with whatever our time is, which you've got, and it looks atrocious. So let's just tidy that up real quick. Back to code. I don't want it to display the time converted to a string. I want it to display two other things. I'm going to give it me some space, double quotes, and in the double quotes I want it to say time colon space. That's all within the double quotes. And then at the end of that, I want to also display, that's what the plus means here, also display, doesn't mean add, it means also display, the time which we're going to use the math functions to round. Math f dot round. Okay, and you can round to an integer, which is what we want, and then open and close brackets to pass the time in, which we then convert to a string. I know it looks complicated, but all we're saying here is display the word time, then also display the time, which we've rounded to the nearest whole number, which we're then going to convert to a string. Give it a save, see what that does. That looks far nicer, doesn't it? One last thing I want to show you here is obviously you can see that the time is actually decreasing as a decimal floating point value, but that's not what the user sees. The user sees something much more clear. You can, of course, change the time even while the game is running, and you can see there's nothing stopping you going into minus values. So the last thing I would do here to actually have this transition to our lose scene is, once you've done that bit of maths, do an if statement. If the time is less than or equal to 0, open squiggly brackets, well, let's call our scene manager again to transition between scenes. Scene manager, which if you haven't already put in at the top, it may automatically add for you, or if not, now's the time to identify it. We need to be using UnityEngine.scene management at the top, just like we were using previously. So we're going to call the scene manager, tell it to load a scene, and we want it to load the scene with the name of lose or win or whatever you want to happen when it reaches 0. Maybe in your game, survival is what counts and getting to 0 takes you to the win screen, or maybe it takes you to your lose screen. Doesn't matter, okay? So I can test that, but obviously if I've got to wait 10 minutes to play my game, that's no good. So just in the editor, I'm going to change that to, let's say, 5 seconds. And we're going to see, after 5 seconds, does it take me to the lose screen? We can see it counting down. No. Lose couldn't be loaded because it's not been added to the build profile. If you remember that last step that we did when we were moving from a main menu, File, Build Profiles, and you can see the scene list doesn't have the lose or the win screen in it. We never added them. So open the scene list, find your scenes list, and make sure that you've got win and lose in there. Doesn't matter the order in this case, because the main menu will always load first, and the only place the main menu can take you is here, and then you can go win or lose depending on what you want it to happen. So let's see, does that now work? There you go, and we can see, even though not a lot has visually changed, we know we're in our lose screen, even though there's nothing on our lose screen at the minute. So, feeling pretty good about this so far. We've got a value displaying on screen, and that works for whatever. Let me just show you how to customize some fonts, and then we'll see how we're doing for time. Let's say I don't like this font. I would like that to be different, and I want it to be the same font on my main menu. Don't like that. So let's say we're going to make a slightly more scary game. Well, I want to customize the font. So I'm going to use this font here, which I'm just on dafont.com. And I'm going to download that font. And I'm going to open it up, which is in my downloads folder. I'm going to extract it. And in there, you will find the font file, which we're going to drag and drop into Unity's asset space. I'm going to drag and drop into the assets just by dragging to asset. Or if you've got it open, you can just drag and drop it into there. But you can now see there is a font. You'd think that would be the end of the story, but it isn't. It's more complicated. We need to use TextMesh Pro's tools to convert that from a font to a font atlas, which is what TextMesh Pro actually uses. So if I were to click on this piece of text up here, or whatever text I want, and I tries to choose the font atlas, you'll see that it can't see scare arms. Scare arms doesn't yet exist. So what I have to do is Window TextMesh Pro font asset creator, and I'm going to drag that font, which is just a bog standard font, and then generate a font atlas and then save it in the same place. And now I've got a font atlas that TextMesh Pro can understand. So if I select this, I can now choose Scare Arms, and there we go. Looks pretty cool. Let's make this really scary. And that font will be selectable in this scene or in any of the other scenes. So if I go to my game, save those changes, I can do the same over here. I'll select that piece of text and change the font atlas. Let's change the colour warrior. Yeah. Looks a hell of a lot better than the default, doesn't it? Now there is one last thing I would like to show. I mentioned at the start that your main menu, exit, doesn't do anything yet. And that's true, still doesn't do anything. I'll just show you how to make a build. So if I go to File and Build and Run, I'm going to put this in the source folder, and I'm going to create a new folder which I'm going to call Build. Select that folder, and all things being well, this will take a minute, maybe 2 minutes to compile down. And unless it throws any errors, we should have a nice easy stage now of having a testable build for your project, which is now an executable file. Okay, so that is now automatically gone into running the game. It'll load the first scene. So we've got when duty calls. Slightly disappointed, as you can see here, that the positioning of our text isn't always where you think it's going to be, and that's why it's useful to use those snapping tools when we create the build. Start game should take us through, and then this should take us to our lose screen, which it does. To close the program, because we haven't told Escape to do anything, you can press Alt and F4 to leave, but you don't need to make a new build to try it again. If I go to source and repos, I can see build, I can see there's our scene which is called menus, which we can do better naming for later, and we're going to see if exit actually works. Exit game, do you close the game? There you go. So if we really wanted to, we could put that in all of our scenes and say when I press escape, do that if you really wanted to. Okay, that's everything from me. Thank you very much.